I still remember his voice echoing through that marble hall like a gunshot. "Don't ever show your face here again, you dirty old man." It was my daughter's birthday, the house I paid for, the champagne I bought, the business I built that kept him rich. My son-in-law, Carter Vance, said it loud enough for every guest to hear. My daughter, Elara, looked away, pretending not to know me. They said I embarrassed them, too old-fashioned, too controlling. Before we dive fully into this story to uncover the deepest secrets, real family betrayal and satisfying revenge, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is where you are now. I said nothing. Just smiled, slow and cold. Because while he was parading around in his designer suit, bragging about his company, he had no idea that 70% of it, every office, every truck, every paycheck, still belonged to me. As I turned to leave, my lawyer's text came through, "Carter's moving assets offshore." Just like you predicted. I didn't react right away. When you've been betrayed enough times, you learn the power of silence. From my car, I watched the lights of their mansion fade in the rearview mirror. They thought I was gone for good. But I was only just beginning. I spent the next few days reviewing Carter's financial moves. He was trying to push me out of the shadows, moving funds into shell accounts under Vance Innovations. But one document stood out, a new trust, signed under my daughter's name. That's when I realized she wasn't just an innocent bystander. She was helping him. My attorney called later that evening. "You won't believe who just bought 5% of your remaining shares, Mr. Rowan," he said. "Someone named Elara Vance." My blood went cold. I invited them to dinner, polite, cordial, old-fashioned. Carter showed up with arrogance and a Rolex the size of his ego. Elara sat quietly, eyes down, pretending to be loyal. Halfway through the meal, I said, "Carter, do you know what 70% ownership means?" He laughed. "It means old money trying to stay relevant." I smiled. "No, it means I can end your empire with one vote." His smile dropped. The room went silent. Elara shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Carter tried to recover, but his confidence had cracked. I stood up, placed my napkin on the table, and walked out without another word. That night, someone broke into my study. The safe was untouched, but on my desk sat a single note: "You should have stayed gone, old man." I started tracing Carter's connections, friends in politics, accountants overseas, and one name that kept reappearing, Nolan Crest. An old associate of mine, fired years ago for embezzlement. Now working as Carter's consultant. It wasn't business. It was revenge. They were using Elara as leverage, trying to wrest control before my health or patience gave out. So I played their game. I leaked a rumor to the press, Vance Innovations under federal scrutiny. Stock dipped 8% in a day. Carter called me, furious, threatening legal action. I hung up before he finished his sentence. That night, Elara called for the first time in months. Her voice trembled. "Dad, he's not who you think he is." I stayed silent, waiting. She continued, "Please, just trust me." Then the line went dead. It was 2:17 in the morning when her email came through. No subject line, just attachments. Inside were documents, financial trails, secret recordings, and offshore transfers under Nolan Crest's name. But one recording stopped me cold. Carter's voice: "Once he's out of the picture, everything's ours. Elara signs the papers, we bury him quietly." My daughter's voice replied, softly, "He'll never see it coming." I sat in the darkness of my office, the only light coming from my computer screen. My hands trembled slightly as I saved every file. I poured myself a drink and whispered to the empty room, "Oh, my dear Elara, you have no idea what I already know." The betrayal cut deeper than any business deal ever could. But I wasn't finished yet. I met with my private investigator, Hank Lowell, a man who speaks little and charges plenty. He slid an envelope across the table. Inside were surveillance photos, Carter meeting with Nolan Crest at an abandoned marina. But something else caught my eye. Elara was there too. She wasn't being coerced. She was smiling. And on the table between them sat a folder with my company's name on it, Rowan Holdings. I studied each photo carefully, memorizing every detail. Hank pointed at a second figure in the photo background. "You might want to see this, sir," he said quietly. "That's your brother, Mason Rowan." I felt the air leave my lungs. Mason. The brother I hadn't spoken to in 18 years. The pieces were falling into place now, and the picture they formed was uglier than I'd imagined. Mason and I hadn't spoken in 18 years. He'd always envied my success, said I was too cautious for modern business. When I called him, his voice was smoother than I remembered. "Rowan," he said, "some people think you're losing touch. Maybe it's time to pass the torch." I smiled. "You mean to you?" He chuckled. "Or to someone who listens to me, like Carter." And just like that, I understood the real game. It wasn't just betrayal by my daughter and her husband, it was my own brother pulling the strings. Mason had always wanted what I built. Now he was using Carter and Elara to take it. That night, a package arrived at my doorstep. Inside was an unsigned share transfer form with my forged signature already on it. They were getting bolder, more desperate. At the next shareholder meeting, Carter walked in like a king. Elara stood beside him, her wedding ring flashing under the light. Mason sat near the front, pretending to be the neutral uncle. Carter announced a leadership transition proposal. My name was missing. When it was my turn, I spoke quietly. "I'm glad to see ambition," I said, "but next time, gentlemen, try using real signatures." The room froze. I held up the forged documents for all to see, every executive gasped. Carter's face went pale. Mason shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The board members whispered among themselves, confusion spreading like wildfire. I placed the documents on the table and sat down calmly. Carter's smile faltered, but Mason's didn't. He mouthed one word across the table, "Nice try." After the meeting, I visited someone I hadn't seen in years, August Pierce, my mentor, the man who taught me business strategy decades ago. He was blind now but sharp as ever. "Betrayal," he said, "isn't the end of loyalty, it's the beginning of truth." He told me something I'd forgotten. Every company transaction was tied to an old founder's clause, one that only I could activate with my original seal, still hidden in my first office downtown. If Carter wanted control, he'd have to find that seal first. I thanked August and left. When I reached the old office that night, the door was already open. Papers were scattered everywhere. Someone had beaten me there. My heart pounded as I stepped inside, searching for any sign of the seal. Inside the dusty office, I found papers scattered, drawers torn open. But whoever broke in wasn't after cash, they wanted something specific. The founder's seal was gone. On the desk was a note written in my daughter's handwriting, "Dad, please stop." He promised he'd protect me. I realized she wasn't playing Carter's game, she was trapped in it. He'd been threatening her since the beginning, using her love and guilt against me. I closed the note, whispered to the empty room, "All right, Carter. You've made this personal." I looked at the security feed footage Hank retrieved later. Carter wasn't the one who stole the seal. It was Mason. My own brother had broken into my office, taken the one thing that could protect my legacy, and left my daughter's note as a distraction. Mason called me first. "Rowan," he said smoothly, "I found your seal before anyone else could. I kept it safe." Safe. That word lingered like smoke. I played along. "Appreciate that, brother." He replied, "You should have never mixed family and business. You taught me that." He was right, I had. But Mason had forgotten why I taught it, because family greed burns longer than corporate rivalry. After the call, Hank sent me another message, a video from the marina. In it, Mason handed Carter a briefcase. I watched the footage 3 times, analyzing every movement, every gesture. Inside the briefcase wasn't money, it was my original company charter, the one that legally binds every shareholder vote to my authority. Mason had just handed Carter the keys to my kingdom. I met Carter at his downtown penthouse under the guise of making peace. He greeted me like an old friend, all charm and false warmth. "Rowan, we all overreacted," he said. "Let's just fix this quietly." His words were polished, but his eyes were restless, darting to the corner where his laptop was streaming a hidden call. I walked to the bar, poured myself a drink, and said, "You're live streaming this to Mason, aren't you?" He froze. I picked up the laptop and turned it toward him. Mason's face stared back in shock. I smiled. "Tell him I said hello." I shut the laptop, slipped out quietly, and texted Hank, "Start the audit." Carter stood there, speechless, as I walked out the door. The game was changing, and they were finally starting to realize it. 3 days later, Hank's team traced $37 million siphoned from Rowan Holdings into shell companies in Belize, all under Carter's digital signature, forged by Mason. I didn't react. I simply forwarded the files to a trusted prosecutor I'd once helped in an old case. That same night, Elara showed up at my door, mascara running down her face. "Dad, I didn't know about the money, he said you were dying." I made her tea, sat across from her, and said calmly, "Then you should stay alive long enough to see who he really is." She looked at me with tears in her eyes. I gave her a recording device and whispered, "When Carter starts talking, let him talk." She nodded, understanding what I needed her to do. This was her chance to choose the right side. Carter invited Elara and Mason for dinner, a private one at a high-end restaurant. Elara wore the recording pin I gave her. Halfway through the evening, Carter bragged openly about how he'd manipulated my daughter, faked my health reports, and stolen millions with Mason's help. "Old man Rowan won't see this coming," Carter laughed. But I did. Because at that moment, 2 tables away, I sat listening with a hidden earpiece. Every word he said was being recorded, documented, preserved. Carter's phone buzzed suddenly. Mason had sent him a text, "He knows." I watched Carter's face go pale. He looked around the restaurant frantically. Mason stood up abruptly, knocking over his wine glass. Elara sat frozen, the recording pin still active. The trap had sprung perfectly. The next morning, Mason and Carter arrived for an emergency board meeting, confident they'd cornered me into signing a retirement deal. I walked in, calm as always, carrying only one folder. When Carter handed me the papers, I slid them aside. "Before I sign," I said, "I'd like everyone to listen to something." Elara pressed play from her phone. Carter's voice filled the room. The confessions, the laughter, the lies, all of it. The board erupted in shock. Carter went pale. Mason looked ready to faint. I leaned forward and said, "Gentlemen, this isn't revenge. This is record-keeping." Security escorted them out as they protested wildly. As Carter passed me, he whispered, "You'll regret this, old man." I replied quietly, "No, Carter. You will." The doors closed behind them with a satisfying click. The company's tension was thick enough to choke on. Whispers filled every hallway, employees wondering if I'd finally stepped down. I didn't. Instead, I walked into the building with my old security chief and said just 5 words to the receptionist, "Mr. Rowan has returned home." In my office, a file lay open on my desk. Someone had been digging into my private portfolio. Not Carter. Not Mason. It was Elara. Her trail led to a numbered bank account that didn't belong to her, it belonged to Mason's dead wife. I stared at the documents, trying to piece together what this meant. A notification pinged on my phone, "Unknown transfer request, $70 million awaiting approval. Someone was making a major move. I needed to act fast before everything collapsed around me. I found Elara in my old study, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Dad, I was trying to stop them," she said. "By moving $70 million. Her voice broke. "They said they'd ruin me if I didn't." Then she showed me her phone, messages from Mason and Carter. Threats. One read, "Do as we say or you'll lose everything. Your father's empire dies tonight." I took the phone, scrolled through the evidence quietly, then asked, "Did you record this?" She nodded. I smiled faintly. "Good. You're finally learning." I handed her a flash drive. "Upload everything. Let them believe you're still on their side." She looked at me with hope in her eyes for the first time in months. "Dad, I'm so sorry." I touched her shoulder gently. "We'll fix this together." Mason called that night, furious. "Rowan, we know you're behind this audit. Stop it or your daughter's name will go public." I laughed softly. "You think you can blackmail a man who's already been humiliated in front of the world?" He didn't respond. Because at that very moment, the files Elara uploaded were being tracked. Every device, every account Mason and Carter used was now under government investigation. I didn't tell them that. I wanted them to panic first. At midnight, Hank called. "Sir, Mason's moving everything offshore tonight. You ready?" I looked out my window, the city lights burning like judgment. "Yes. Let the net close." Within hours, federal agents would have everything they needed. The web I'd been weaving for months was finally tightening around them. FBI agents stormed the Rowan Holdings annex at dawn. Carter was dragged out mid-call, still shouting about family misunderstandings. Mason vanished. By noon, the markets had frozen every account tied to their names. I didn't gloat. I just sat in my chair, watching the press conference unfold. The spokesperson said, evidence provided anonymously led to the arrest of two key figures in a multi-million-dollar laundering scheme. Anonymous. They didn't know the old man in the shadows had orchestrated every move. Elara sat across from me, watching the news in silence. "Is it over?" she asked quietly. I shook my head. "Not yet." That night, Mason called from an unlisted number. His voice was shaking. "You think you've won? Check your daughter's bank account." I felt my stomach drop. I opened Elara's account, $500 million credited overnight. It wasn't Mason's doing. It was a diversion, his last trap. Buried in that account were fake transfers that implicated her in his crimes. If she withdrew even $1, she'd go down with him. But I'd planned for that. Months ago, I'd built a parallel shell company in her name, legally separate, invisible to Mason's eyes. I redirected every suspicious fund to it in real time. By dawn, Mason's trap became his own coffin, every fake transfer now pointed back to his credentials. Mason was arrested that afternoon. Carter's plea deal collapsed. Elara was free. I closed my laptop and whispered, "Justice isn't revenge. It's remembering who deserves peace." Elara hugged me tightly, crying into my shoulder. "Thank you, Dad." The courtroom buzzed like a theater before a storm. Mason, in handcuffs, sneered at me from the defendant's table. But when the judge called for Exhibit 7, my blood ran cold. It was a recorded conversation, my voice, clear as daylight, giving instructions about the fund transfers. Fabricated or real, I didn't know yet. Elara looked at me, panic in her eyes. Mason smirked and whispered across the courtroom, "You think you were the only one setting traps?" The prosecutor played the recording. My voice echoed through the room, discussing offshore accounts and hidden transactions. The jury looked at me with suspicion. Mason's lawyer stood up, ready to deliver his closing argument. The judge ordered an immediate forensic audit, of my holdings. I sat there, expressionless, but inside, my mind was racing. Someone had set me up perfectly. 2 days later, my face was everywhere. Rowan Duval, the puppet master of corporate fraud. But I stayed silent. I had learned the art of quiet warfare. That night, Hank burst into my study. "Sir, someone leaked your private recordings, internal meetings, even the board votes." I turned my laptop around. On the screen, a video played, Mason and Carter having dinner with someone I knew too well. Nathan Corrick, Elara's husband, my so-called son-in-law. The man who once threw me out of his home. I froze the frame, Nathan shaking hands with Mason, smiling coldly. The betrayal went deeper than I'd imagined. Nathan had been playing both sides all along. He'd married Elara to get closer to my empire. Everything suddenly made sense, the timing, the manipulation, the perfectly orchestrated chaos. Nathan came to my house uninvited. He didn't look afraid, he looked victorious. "Rowan," he said, "you had your fun. Now it's my turn." I stayed quiet. He continued, "You think those 70% shares still matter? They don't. We diluted your stock 6 months ago. You own 12% now." I smiled faintly. "I know," I said. "I approved it." He blinked. That was the moment I saw fear flicker for the first time. "What?" he stammered. I pulled out a sealed folder from my desk, the real ownership certificate. The one filed under a different company name. Nathan whispered, "Impossible." I stood up slowly. "You should have done better research, Nathan. Irongate Capital has owned the controlling shares for 15 years. I just let you think you were winning." The following morning, the press announced a surprise merger between Rowan Holdings and Irongate Capital, a shadow corporation no one had heard of. What no one knew was that Irongate was a ghost company I'd built 15 years ago, under an alias. Every share Nathan thought he owned was now owned by Irongate. Mason's empire was absorbed. Carter's assets were liquidated. Elara's name was cleared. But one problem remained, someone inside my circle was feeding Nathan my every move. That night, I received a voice memo from an unknown number. Elara's voice whispered, "Dad, I'm sorry. They said they'd kill him if I didn't tell them everything." My heart sank. Nathan had been using threats against her husband to manipulate her. The web of lies was more tangled than I'd realized. I had to end this quickly. I sat in the dark, listening to the rain against the windows. All my brilliance, all my control, undone by love. She had betrayed me again, but this time, it wasn't out of greed. It was out of fear. Nathan had played his last card, Elara's heart. But I wasn't broken. I called Hank and gave one order, send the video. He hesitated. The one of Nathan with Mason's wife? Yes. The one from 2 years ago. Minutes later, the footage hit the internet. The scandal detonated like a bomb. Nathan's reputation collapsed overnight. His investors fled. Elara called, sobbing. "Dad, what have you done?" I replied softly, "I just reminded the world who started this war." As I hung up, a message appeared on my phone, "Meet me at the old warehouse." Alone. Nathan. I stood alone in the dimly lit warehouse, the smell of metal and dust in the air. Nathan waited for me at the far end, leaning casually against a pillar, a smug smile on his face. "You really think you can win, Rowan?" he said, his voice dripping with arrogance. "I don't think," I replied. "I know." Suddenly, the sound of a door creaking open echoed through the space. I turned to see Mason entering, shackles clinking. Nathan's smirk faded. "Dad, please," Elara's voice broke the silence from behind. She was standing at the entrance, her eyes full of tears. Mason took a step forward, and I noticed the glint of a gun in his hand. My body tensed. I wasn't sure whose side he was on anymore. Everything I'd planned could collapse in this single moment. Mason raised the gun and pointed it at me. I didn't flinch. You think I've been playing the game all wrong? I asked calmly. He smirked. I've been playing it my way for years. But just as he tightened his grip, the sound of a gunshot rang through the warehouse. It wasn't from Mason's gun. Elara had somehow slipped behind him, and the shot wasn't aimed at me, it was aimed at Mason's hand. He dropped the gun with a scream. In the chaos, I saw something I never expected, a third player emerging from the shadows, Nolan Crest. He stepped forward slowly, clapping his hands mockingly. Bravo, Rowan. But did you really think this was the end? My blood ran cold. Nolan had been orchestrating everything from the beginning. He was the true mastermind. Nolan Crest, my old business associate, stepped forward, his dark eyes gleaming with malice. You didn't think you could defeat me that easily, Rowan, did you? I blinked, trying to process the betrayal. Nolan was behind everything. He was the one who planted the seeds of discord between my daughter, Mason, and Carter. Nolan had been the invisible hand, manipulating everyone, even Mason. I wanted to teach you a lesson in patience, Nolan said. You always thought you were the smartest. Well, I'm smarter. He pulled out a sealed letter from his coat pocket and handed it to me. Inside was a document showing that Nolan Crest owned 50% of Rowan Holdings, half of everything I built, including my shares. I felt my world crumbling around me. Everything I'd fought for was slipping away. I felt the air leave my lungs. The letter was real. Nolan had been pulling strings from behind the scenes, orchestrating every twist. He had turned my empire against me, using Mason and Carter like puppets. But you didn't think I'd let you get away with it, did you? I asked, keeping my composure. Nolan's smirk grew wider. I've already won, Rowan. You just don't know it yet. Just then, I glanced at Elara, and something changed in her eyes. Dad, she said softly, there's one thing you didn't know. She pulled out her phone and showed me a video, Nolan, Mason, and Carter in a meeting, discussing a plan to kill me after the takeover. It was all a setup to make me disappear. My daughter had been recording everything, gathering evidence for months. The final moments unfolded like a slow-motion movie. Nolan turned to Elara, his eyes narrowed. You're still playing me? I gave her a nod, and she made her move, pressing a button on her phone, sending the video straight to the press and simultaneously alerting the FBI. The room filled with panic. Nolan's empire, everything he built from the shadows, crumbled instantly. Before Nolan could react, a dozen agents stormed the warehouse. But it wasn't just for Nolan. The moment I locked eyes with him, I said calmly, the world knows you now, Nolan. You've been playing chess while I was already 10 moves ahead. Elara stepped forward, standing next to me. And now we play the final move. Mason, Carter, Nathan, and Nolan were all arrested that night. My empire was restored. My daughter was safe. Justice had finally been served. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel and share your impressions of this story in the comments. Don't forget to turn your notifications on to listen to more stories from this channel. Thank you for watching.